Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with a requested video. So a while back I posted on my Instagram if you guys had any suggestions of what videos you wanted to see from me, and one of you asked me to do top 10 spring palettes. So that's what I'm here with today. I'm going to talk you through the top 10 palettes that I have selected for my own collection that I will use this spring. So it's a big mix of pastel palettes, kind of warm tone palettes, pinky tone palettes, a lot of a big mix, but these are the kind of shades that I want to reach for this time of year. So before I jump into the video, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So I'm going to go through these palettes kind of in brand order, and the first one that I have comes from Colourpop. This palette is one that is very well loved in my collection, and I think this is perfect for this time of year, and that is my Colourpop The Child palette. So this one looks like this on the inside. I will actually insert some footage here what it looks like, both the palette and the swatches. So this palette I really love this time of year because it is those kind of mintier tones, so it kind of falls into that pastel kind of looks that I like going for in spring. But you also do have some more warm tones if you want to start leaning into those type of tones. It's a great palette because you have more everyday shades. You can create pure like neutral everyday looks, and you also have those more kind of out there pastels. So I really do love this palette a lot, and as you can see, it has gotten a lot of love in my collection, and I will definitely be giving it some more use this upcoming spring. The next brand that I have to talk about is Huda Beauty, and I have two palettes from her to talk about. The first one is one that I personally really like for spring, and that is the Huda Beauty Nude Light Obsessions. So on the inside, again, you can see it has those kind of pastel tones. It is kind of like pinky, purpley leaning, but I really love the undertones. It's just something about them that is very springtime to me, and maybe like because the pinks have a little bit more of a peach undertone, like a warmer pink kind of undertone, which I really love. You have some beautiful pop-up shimmers that can be used in loads of different ways. You have like a pink with a gold shift, which is stunning. You have a purple, you have more kind of neutral shades, and then you have a big array of mattes. So overall the mattes are quite warm leaning. You have more of a peachy shade and a warm brown, which are both those kind of romantic undertones, which I really enjoy. And you have more of a pure pink, which still has that same undertone, but it's more pink leaning. And then you have more of a mauve if you want to go slightly more cool toned. So it is another 9-pine palette, but I really love these tones. And for me, this is more of an everyday kind of palette in spring. But I do love reaching for this one. And again, you can create those beautiful pastel looks with this palette. The next Huda Beauty palette is one that is a classic. I think a lot of people see this as a spring tone palette, and I do too. And that is the Mercury Retrograde palette. So this one has a big array of shades on the inside. It has obviously quite a lot more because it is 18 shades in here, so it's twice as many as the other two palettes I've shown you. But again, you have those more kind of pastel tones. You have some more mauve, some pinks, some peaches, even like more of an orange leaning shade. But on top of that, you also have more kind of neutral brown leaning shades, as well as those turquoise and blues in the top corner. So this palette is very versatile, and again, it falls into those kind of pastel tones. So even the colorful shades in here are a bit more muted, which I think is very spring. You can create some deeper looks with this palette compared to the other two that I've shown you. There is some more deeper shades, especially like down here in this corner. There's some deeper shades as well as the shimmer on top. But overall, this is a beautiful spring tone palette, and I will definitely be reaching for this one. It's a really fun one, and it's a cool classic for a reason. So we're moving away from the more kind of pastel tones, but this it still kind of falls into a similar family as the last two palettes, but this one is definitely more neutral. This is the Norvina palette from Anastasia, and I really love this one because it has that romantic undertones. Like I said, this is more a neutral palette for me. I don't consider this a pastel palette, but it still has a lot of pinkier and purpley undertones, which again, I kind of connect with this type of year, especially when they're a little bit warmer like this palette has. So yeah, the pinks in here are a little bit more warm leaning, which I really enjoy. My favorite type of pinks to wear. But apart from those purple and pinks undertones, you also have more neutral shades, which makes this palette a bit more versatile. Because of that, this do fall into like a neutral palette territory for me, and I don't see it as like a pink palette. But if you look at the undertones, they kind of just fall more into spring compared to other neutral palettes that I have that might be a bit more warm, which I you know, kind of connect with summer or autumn, depending, or like if they're more cool, I consider them winter. But this, because it has those kind of pinkier romantic undertones, again, I put this one under spring. So yeah, this is the next spring tone palette that I have to share. For the fifth palette, we have a Pat McGrath palette, and obviously all of them look the same on the outside. But this palette right here is the Utopian Dreams palette, which is actually the first Pat McGrath palette that I got. I think this is a bit of a spring palette because, again, it has some more kind of warmer tones, but it's still not as like rich as summer palettes are for me. So you do have a beautiful peach in this palette, which is another color that I connect with spring. Like peachier tones are definitely spring tone colors for me compared to like oranges, which are more summer and autumn. But peaches fall into more spring to summer for me, so like the earlier half of that warmer season. And with that, you also have a bit more kind of, again, pinkier tones, purples, and some golds. And overall, this is just a beautiful, beautiful palette. It is a little bit more kind of warm than the other ones, but it still has those similar undertones. I promise you, we will get some different palettes, but not all of them will be like romantic and pinks. But again, it is one of my favorite things to reach for this time of year. But yeah, I will give you some more other kind of palettes too. But yeah, this is a beautiful palette, and it's definitely one that I love reaching for this time of year. So because of that, I had to feature it. So let's move away from the pinkier tone palettes, and we have a Natasha Norvina palette next. Out of all of my Natasha Norvina palettes, the one that I decided to go with was the Sendo palette, which is a beautiful, again, warmer tone palette, but it does also have a cooler tone side. So the reason why I decided to go with this one, because again, it has those kind of peachier undertones. This one is definitely a bit more orange leaning than pinks. There's one shade that's slightly more pink leaning, but overall this is definitely more of an orangey peach kind of palette. It has some golds, some kind of red tones, and a beautiful warmer tone side. But on top of that, it also has a cooler side, like I said, and there are beautiful green shades in here. And with those shades, you can create a beautiful kind of pastel-y look again with these tones right here. So like the kind of greeny and turquoisey, minty kind of shades. But you can also mix them in with the warmer tones. And again, because of the tones, I do see this as like a spring tone palette. Yes, you can make more kind of autumnal look with this too, but in my head, this is definitely more spring. I just can imagine like a look with like this minty shade here with like one of these peaches. It's like a beautiful wash of color, like watercolor kind of look, with like a beautiful sheer shimmer on the lid, something like that. And that's the kind of looks, again, that I'm going for that time of year. And I think this is a perfect one to create those kind of looks with. Another palette that is definitely one of the first ones that I picked out. I think this one and the Mercury Retrograde palette were the top two from like the ones that I showed you that I thought initially about including in this video. But the palette that I decided to go with next is the Tiny Marvels palette, which is probably the most like springy palette that I have in my collection, just looking at it. It is a beautiful, beautiful palette. This was a collaboration with Mel Thompson, let her rest in peace. And it is a beautiful, beautiful color story. It's just such a unique one. Again, you do have a couple more, I don't know, darker and sultrier shades. But overall, this is so spring to me. You have those bright colors that are still a bit more muted, a bit more, not necessarily like pastel, but it has that kind of undertone, like a bit more muted. And it's hard to describe, but I love this palette so much for spring. You have some good selections of those kind of greens that I love wearing, the peaches, the purples, mixed with some more neutral shades. So it's a really, really beautiful palette. And if you've been thinking about this palette and you don't have it in your collection, I do definitely recommend it. I'm sure there's other things that are similar out there, but this is just such a beautiful palette and I love using this one a lot. Honestly, this palette can probably be like an all year round palette because you do have those different undertones, but for me, this is definitely like mainly a spring tone palette, although I can create looks with this one all year round. So that is my next choice. And again, it's probably the one that comes in highest out of the list. And this is definitely the first one that I pulled out of all of them. The next brand we also have two palettes from, and that is Oden's Eye. So first up, we have this palette right here, which is the Hella palette in collaboration with Angelica Nyqvist. And it is a beautiful, beautiful spring tone palette. And it does have some really nice pops of colors. So you have this first top rows, which are very green heavy. The top row is a bit more kind of muted and yellowy tone greens, which I love reaching for this time of year too. But it's really like the second row, especially the third shade on the second row, that is really screaming spring to me out of the greens. but the greens are beautiful tones. They're very bright, very vibrant, and just very, very springy to me. Then you also do have some pinks, which again, I've already said is a color that I love wearing for spring. These ones aren't as like peachy, but they're still warm tone pinks, which I like wearing this time of year. And then you do have like a beautiful iridescent orangey kind of shade, orange to green, which again falls into the rest of this palette, which is stunning. And then at the bottom you do have some smokier shades, which maybe don't really fall into that spring theme, but overall this is just one of the most spring tone palettes in my collection. This is the newest palette that I have in my collection, and I actually got this one from a subscriber, which I'm so grateful for. And I actually haven't played around with it yet, but I have been saving this one. When this video goes up, I think I already would have played around with this one, but I am using it for my March palettes in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project. I'm going to pull this one out for sure in that project and play around with it, and I can't wait because it's a beautiful palette and it's the perfect one for this time of year. This is probably another one that was the top ones that I thought about when I thought about spring tone palettes in combination with the Tiny Marvels palette. This is a very different palette, but it's also one of the top ones that I pulled out for this video. Then the second one from Oden's Eye is actually one of their Christmas releases from last year, and this is the Hey Reindeer palette. So it is a Christmas release, but in my head, this is definitely more of a spring tone palette. This is definitely a bit more cool tone than some of the other ones that I showed you, but it does have loads of those pastel tones again. You have like a pastel blue, you have some like pastel purples. They are a little bit muted, but yeah, you definitely have them in there. And then a big mix of beautiful shimmers that are again a bit more pastel leaning. It's not the most like traditional spring tone palette for me because again, I have mentioned this over and over in this video, but for me, spring tones are very green, pinks and peaches, and this one doesn't really have those tones. It has more kind of blues, turquoise, reds, and like muted purples. But it's just something about this palette that definitely screams spring to me. Maybe it's a little bit more kind of Easter theme, I guess, with the colors in here. And yeah, I really love this palette. I haven't played around with it too much because it's relatively new to me. But it's definitely another palette that I'm going to pull out and play with this spring. I think I'm going to include this one in my April Big Fat Eyeshadow project palettes. And I will play around with it then and create some beautiful springtime looks. So that is the next palette. The last palette that I have to share with you today is another kind of pinkier leaning palette, but I just feel like this is a beautiful pastel palette, especially if you like pinks and purples and just kind of those romantic tones. And that is the Beauty Bay Love Nose palette. So unfortunately this one is discontinued. There's been a couple palettes in this video that has been discontinued. But this palette is perfect for spring in my opinion because it does have really light shades. The eyeshadows in here lean a lot like purple, pink, peachy, like I've said. Again, is one of my favorite type of tones to reach for this time of year. And just because it runs so light, you can create some beautiful pastel looks, which again, this is something that I connect with spring. This palette is more kind of early spring to me because I could also use this one in winter, I guess, because it is a little bit more cool toned. But because of the pastel factors of this palette, I wanted to still include it in this video. And you know, if you're someone who likes more kind of cool toned eyeshadows, not necessarily like those warmer tones, pastels that I talked about, I think this is a really good option for you because most of the shades in here are a little bit more cool toned. Yes, there are some shades on like the side here that are definitely a bit more kind of warmer, but overall I think this palette leans a bit more cool, so you do have that option too if you're looking for like a pastel-y purple pink palette that leans a little bit more cool tones. That is my last choice. So there you go, there you have my top 10 eyeshadow palette selection for spring. It's a big mix of older palettes, new palettes, all of that kind of stuff. Let me know what your favorite pick out of the 10 that I shared was. Which one do you think is the most spring tone palette out of the ones I picked? And also from your own collection, which palettes are you going to pull out for spring? Do you disagree with me? Is there any other palettes that you want to add to this list? Maybe there's something that you have in your collection that I don't, that you think is a beautiful spring tone palette. So share them down below so everyone else can read your comments. And otherwise, I hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are. And I will catch you in my next one. Bye guys.